I am Serena Whitlock, and I am 36 years old. Before anything else, before the betrayal, before the humiliation, before the moment that changed how I saw my family forever, there was the wedding. A wedding that was supposed to be joyful. A wedding that was meant to celebrate love, unity, and new beginnings. My younger brother's wedding was the kind people dream of, lavish without being tasteless, elegant without being stiff. Every detail had been carefully curated to project perfection. From the towering floral arrangements to the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, everything whispered wealth, tradition, and status. Before this story continues, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Stories like this reach the people who need them most when they're shared. Those quietly enduring family manipulation, emotional betrayal, or the pain of being strong without support. The venue was Ravenport Hall, a historic estate on the edge of Silverbrook Heights, a place known for hosting society weddings and political fundraisers. Long ivory drapes cascaded from the high ceilings, and a string quartet played softly near the entrance, their music blending with laughter and conversation. Guests glided across marble floors, champagne glasses in hand, dressed in designer suits and gowns that shimmered under the lights. I arrived early, as I always do. Punctuality had become second nature to me over the years. Part discipline, part self-protection. I liked to observe before engaging, to read the room, to ground myself. I wore a deep emerald dress tailored specifically for me, understated but powerful. My makeup was clean, my hair styled simply. I didn't dress to compete. I dressed to reflect who I had become. To anyone watching from the outside, I looked confident, successful, put together. And I was. But what most people didn't know was how hard I had worked to reach that place. How many years I had spent building my life independently, without help, without shortcuts, and without applause. My brother, Lucas Whitlock, had always been the family favorite. That wasn't a secret. It was something everyone quietly acknowledged but never addressed. Lucas was charming, social, effortlessly likable. My parents adored him in ways they never tried to hide. His mistakes were framed as learning experiences. His failures were blamed on circumstance. His successes were celebrated loudly and endlessly. I, on the other hand, had learned early to stand on my own. From a young age, I understood that praise would not come easily to me. I learned to rely on results instead of validation, silence instead of reassurance. While Lucas received support, I received expectations. While he was guided, I was tested. My parents often told people I was strong and independent, not realizing, or perhaps fully realizing, that those words were excuses they used to justify withholding emotional and financial support. Still, I loved my family. Or at least, I loved who I believed they were. That day at the wedding, I stood near the reception area, exchanging polite smiles with relatives I hadn't seen in years. Some hugged me warmly. Others complimented my appearance, my career, my composure. A few even whispered how proud they were of me. I smiled, thanked them, and kept my guard up. Then I felt it, that subtle shift in energy. The kind that makes your chest tighten before your mind catches up. I turned and saw my parents walking toward me. Their names are Graham and Eleanor Whitlock. They looked impeccable, as always. My father wore a dark tailored suit, his posture rigid and commanding. My mother was draped in pearls and silk, her smile polite but distant. To anyone else, they looked like proud parents at their son's wedding. But I knew them too well. Their expressions were not warm. They were sharp, focused, calculated. At first, I assumed they wanted to exchange pleasantries or make some comment about the ceremony. That was the image they cultivated: gracious, respectable, generous. But as they drew closer, I saw something else in their eyes. Something I couldn't immediately name. My father spoke first. "Serena," he said, his voice firm and loud enough to cut through the surrounding chatter. "We need to talk about your penthouse." I blinked. "My penthouse?" I asked, certain I had misheard him. He didn't hesitate. "Yes. You know it belongs to the family now." The words didn't register right away. It was like hearing a sentence in a language you don't speak. Familiar sounds, no meaning. I felt the room tilt slightly as my mind tried to catch up. "That's not possible," I said calmly. "The penthouse is mine. I purchased it myself. It's legally in my name." I kept my voice steady, my expression neutral. Years of managing corporate negotiations had taught me how to stay composed under pressure. I expected logic to end the conversation. Instead, my mother stepped forward. "This is Lucas's wedding. Eleanor said softly, though her eyes were cold. A time for family to come together. You've done well for yourself, Serena. It's only right that your success supports the family. My heart sank. You're asking me to give up my home, I said quietly. Before I could continue, my father's expression darkened. His jaw tightened. His patience evaporated. In one swift, shocking movement, right there in front of relatives, friends, servers, and the wedding photographer, he raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound echoed through the hall. Time stopped. Gasps filled the room. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses froze in midair. I felt the sting immediately, a sharp burning sensation spreading across my cheek. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the humiliation. The shock. The disbelief. I stood there, frozen, my face burning, my heart pounding violently in my chest. My mother didn't rush to my side. She nodded, as if it were justified, as if I had deserved it. I turned slowly and saw Lucas standing a few feet away, his face pale, his eyes wide. He looked confused, torn, but he didn't move. He didn't speak. He didn't stop them. That hurt almost as much as the slap. I felt everyone watching me, every whisper, every stare. The weight of judgment pressed down on me from all directions. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor, to wake up from what felt like a nightmare unfolding in real time. Without saying a word, I excused myself. My hand trembled as I pressed it to my cheek and walked away from the reception hall. Each step felt heavy, like I was moving through water. When I finally stepped outside, the cold night air hit my skin, sharp and unforgiving. But it didn't calm the storm raging inside me. I leaned against the stone wall, my breath uneven, my thoughts racing. I replayed the moment over and over, searching for logic, for reason, for anything that would make it make sense. How could they do that to me? How could my own parents humiliate me in front of everyone? As laughter and music drifted faintly from inside the hall, memories I had tried to bury resurfaced with brutal clarity. Birthdays where Lucas received extravagant gifts while I received envelopes with cards. Family vacations planned around his schedule. Financial help offered to him freely while I was told I'd figure it out. Every time I succeeded, it was treated as expected. Every time he succeeded, it was celebrated like a miracle. I had spent years minimizing it, explaining it away, telling myself it didn't matter. Standing outside that wedding hall, my cheeks still burning, I realized it had always mattered. The humiliation wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern, a lifetime of being overlooked, undervalued, and now, openly targeted. Anger rose slowly, replacing shock. Not explosive rage, but something deeper. Heavier. A steady fire. I realized something then. If my parents believed they could intimidate me publicly, shame me into surrendering what I had worked for, and walk away without consequences, they were wrong. Very wrong. I straightened my posture, wiped the tears I refused to let fall, and took a deep breath. I didn't go back inside. I didn't confront them again that night. I didn't make a scene. I walked away. And with every step, something inside me hardened, not into bitterness, but into clarity. They had shown me who they really were. And I was done pretending not to see it. That night, watching the celebration from a distance, I understood something powerful. They could try to humiliate me. They could try to control me. But they could never take my life, my achievements, or my strength. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the moment it truly began. I didn't sleep that night. When I finally returned to my penthouse, the city lights below shimmered like nothing had happened, indifferent to the way my world had cracked open. I kicked off my heels by the door and stood still in the silence, my heart still racing, my cheek faintly throbbing. The apartment felt different suddenly, not colder but sharper, like a mirror reflecting truths I could no longer ignore. I walked to the bathroom and studied my reflection. The redness on my cheek had faded slightly, but it was still visible. I touched it gently, not because it hurt, but because it reminded me that what happened was real. That my own father had raised his hand to me. That my mother had watched and agreed. That my brother had stood silent. I had spent years telling myself I was independent by choice. That I didn't need much from my family. That I was strong enough to stand alone. But standing there, staring at myself under the soft bathroom light, I realized something painful. Independence wasn't something they respected in me. It was something they resented. As the night stretched on, memories surfaced one after another, no longer muted by excuses. I remembered graduating at the top of my class, only for my parents to leave early because Lucas had a social event. I remembered buying my first car on my own, while they helped Lucas upgrade his. I remembered the subtle comments. You don't need help, Serena, you're capable. Lucas needs guidance. Phrases that once sounded like praise but now rang hollow. By morning, my shock had transformed into clarity. This wasn't about the wedding. This was about control. Over the next few days, my parents didn't call to apologize. They didn't check on me. They didn't acknowledge what had happened at all. Instead, Eleanor sent a carefully worded message about family unity and moving forward. No mention of the slap. No accountability. Just expectation. That was when I understood something fundamental. They didn't believe they had done anything wrong. And that realization changed everything. I began paying closer attention to past interactions. The questions my mother had asked over the years about my finances. The way she lingered when visiting my penthouse, commenting on the view, the furnishings, the value of the property. The subtle suggestions about family assets and legacy. At the time, I had brushed them off as curiosity. Now I saw them for what they were. Preparation. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that the wedding confrontation wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned, calculated. They had chosen a moment when I would be surrounded by people, when pressure and shame could be weaponized. And they had underestimated me. I decided I needed answers, not because I expected honesty, but because I needed confirmation. I asked my mother to meet me privately, framing it as a chance to talk calmly, away from the noise and emotions of the wedding. We met at a quiet cafe in Ashbourne Row, a neutral place, public enough to prevent theatrics. She arrived composed, dressed impeccably, her expression carefully controlled. "Serena," she said, as if nothing had happened. "I'm glad you reached out. I didn't waste time. Why did you demand my penthouse?" I asked directly. "Why did you think humiliating me publicly was acceptable?" She sighed softly, stirring her tea. "You're overreacting," she said. "Your father was emotional. We only want what's best for the family." "For the family," I repeated. "Or for Lucas?" Her eyes flickered. "You've always been independent," she continued. "Lucas needs stability. You have more than enough." There it was. No denial. No apology. Just justification. "And the slap?" I asked quietly. She didn't meet my eyes. Sometimes parents have to be firm. Something inside me shifted permanently in that moment. I realized I wasn't talking to a mother seeking reconciliation. I was talking to someone who believed entitlement was love and control was care. I stood up. "This conversation is over," I said. "And so is your access to my life." She looked stunned, as if she had never imagined that outcome. As if boundaries were something other people set, not me. I walked out of the cafe feeling oddly calm. Sad, yes, but no longer confused. That was the day I stopped hoping they would change. Instead, I started planning. The first thing I did was gather every document related to my penthouse. Deeds, purchase agreements, renovation contracts, tax records. I laid them all out on my dining table, reviewing each one carefully. It was strangely grounding, seeing the proof of my hard work in black and white. This wasn't just property. It was my life. I knew I couldn't handle this alone. I needed someone objective, strategic, and absolutely trustworthy. That's when I called Nathan Cole. Nathan had been my friend for over a decade, and my lawyer for almost as long. He knew my history. He knew my family dynamics. More importantly, he knew my values. When I told him everything, the wedding, the slap, the demands, he listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said calmly, "They crossed several lines. And they're not done unless you stop them." That sentence settled deep in my chest. With Nathan's guidance, we discussed protective measures, legal boundaries, financial safeguards, clear documentation. We talked about what my parents could and couldn't claim, and how to ensure they never had leverage again. It wasn't about revenge. It was about defense. For the first time since the wedding, I felt empowered instead of reactive. A week later, my parents requested a family meeting. They invited Lucas as well. I agreed to attend, not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted clarity. We met at my parents' home. The same living room where family photos lined the walls, smiling faces, curated memories. I walked in calm, prepared, and emotionally detached. My father started with a speech about sacrifice and unity. I stopped him. "I'm not giving you anything," I said clearly. "No property. No money. No access." The silence was heavy. Eleanor tried guilt. Graham tried anger. They accused me of selfishness, of ingratitude, of abandoning family values. I let them speak. Then I calmly listed facts. Every financial imbalance. Every subtle pressure. Every comment that revealed their expectations. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult them. I told the truth. For the first time, they had no defense. Lucas sat quietly, absorbing everything. I could see something changing behind his eyes. He wasn't ready to confront them, but he was no longer blind. When the meeting ended, I stood up and left without asking permission. Walking away that time felt different. I wasn't escaping. I was choosing myself. That was my first act of real power. And I wasn't finished yet. The weeks after that family meeting were quieter than I expected. Not peaceful, just quiet in the way that comes when people finally realize their usual tactics no longer work. My parents didn't call as often. When they did, their words were careful, measured, stripped of the confidence they once carried. The authority they had always wielded over me felt absent, as if it had evaporated the moment I stopped reacting. At first, I found the silence unsettling. For most of my life, their presence, critical, demanding, controlling, had been a constant. Even when it hurt, it was familiar. Now, without it, I felt a strange emptiness. Not loneliness, but adjustment. Like learning to walk after shedding a heavy coat you'd worn for years without realizing how much it weighed you down. I spent more time alone in my penthouse during those weeks, not hiding, but grounding myself. I reorganized rooms that no longer felt right. I donated furniture that carried memories I didn't want to keep. I changed the art on the walls. Each small adjustment felt symbolic, like reclaiming space not just physically, but emotionally. One evening, as I stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows watching the city lights ripple across the skyline, I realized something important. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for approval. Not from my parents. Not from my brother. Not from anyone. That realization brought a kind of peace I had never known. Nathan continued to guide me quietly in the background. We finalized additional legal safeguards, clear documentation, explicit boundaries, and formal notices ensuring that my assets were untouchable. Everything was done calmly, professionally, and without drama. There was no confrontation, no threats, no raised voices. Just certainty. The irony was almost laughable. The more composed and deliberate I became, the less power my parents seemed to have. It was as if their influence had depended entirely on my willingness to engage emotionally. Once that was gone, they had nothing left to hold over me. Word began to travel through the family, not in the form of gossip, but through subtle shifts. Conversations changed. Invitations came with different tones. Relatives who had once parroted my parents' narratives began asking quiet questions. Some reached out directly, hesitant but curious. I never spoke with bitterness. I spoke with facts. I described what had happened at the wedding. I explained the demands, the humiliation, the history of pressure. I didn't exaggerate or dramatize. I didn't insult Graham or Eleanor. I simply told the truth and let it sit where it belonged. And slowly, I watched perception change. People started noticing patterns they had ignored for years. How my parents always praised Lucas's achievements loudly, but spoke of mine casually. How they framed my independence as obligation. How generosity flowed in one direction while expectations flowed in another. I didn't feel triumphant about it. I felt validated. Lucas was the most difficult part of it all. We met one afternoon for coffee, just the two of us, at a quiet place overlooking the river. He looked tired. Older somehow. Marriage had changed him already. Not in status, but in awareness. I didn't know, he said finally, staring into his cup. I knew things weren't equal, but I didn't realize how deep it went. I nodded. I didn't either. Not fully. He hesitated. They talk about you differently now. I wasn't surprised. How? Like they don't know what to do, he admitted. They expected you to fall in line. And when you didn't, it shook them. I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. I don't hate them, I said quietly. But I can't keep sacrificing myself to maintain their comfort. Lucas looked at me then, really looked at me. And for the first time, I saw not the favored child, but a man grappling with a truth that challenged everything he had been raised to accept. I respect what you did, he said, even if it's hard for them to accept. That was enough. I didn't need him to choose sides. I didn't need apologies or declarations. His acknowledgement was simply closure. My parents, on the other hand, struggled. Without access to my resources, without emotional leverage, without the authority they once assumed was permanent, they seemed unmoored. Their conversations with me became stiff, cautious. The entitlement had vanished, replaced by confusion. They had underestimated the cost of their actions. And they were living with it. I never confronted them again about the slap. I didn't need to. The absence of access was louder than any accusation. They learned quickly that humiliation had consequences, not explosive ones, but permanent ones. The more distance I created, the more I began to thrive. Professionally, I took on larger projects, ones I had previously hesitated to pursue out of fear that success would invite more demands. Without that fear, my focus sharpened. Recognition followed naturally. Opportunities expanded. My confidence wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. Emotionally, I changed too. I became more selective with my energy. I stopped over-explaining. I stopped justifying my choices. I allowed myself to say no without guilt. And perhaps most importantly, I stopped mistaking endurance for love. One evening, as I hosted a small dinner for close friends in my penthouse, someone raised a glass and said, "To Serena, who knows her worth." The words settled into me quietly. Knowing your worth doesn't mean arrogance. It doesn't mean cruelty. It doesn't mean revenge. It means boundaries. It means clarity. It means refusing to be diminished. I thought back to the wedding, the chandeliers, the flowers, the perfect facade. How quickly beauty can become a stage for betrayal. How easily love can be weaponized when entitlement disguises itself as tradition. And yet, I didn't regret going. Because that moment had forced me to see the truth. The truth about my parents. The truth about my family. And the truth about myself. I had always been strong. I just hadn't always believed it. Over time, the pain softened. Not because it disappeared, but because it no longer controlled me. The memories lost their sharpness. The humiliation faded into a lesson rather than a wound. I didn't forgive my parents, not in the way people often expect. But I released the need for their validation. And in doing so, I freed myself. Sitting alone one night, the city humming beneath my windows, I reflected on everything that had happened. The betrayal, the confrontation, the quiet reclamation of my life. And I understood something deeply. True power isn't loud. It isn't vengeful. It doesn't need an audience. True power is the ability to walk away without bitterness. To stand firm without cruelty. To protect your dignity without apology. They tried to take my home. They tried to take my confidence. They tried to take my place in the family. They failed. Because the one thing they never owned was me. I smiled then, not out of pride, but out of peace. The kind that comes when you know, without question, that you will never abandon yourself again. And that, more than anything, was my victory. Before we end this story, please like, comment, and subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. Your engagement helps these stories reach people who may be silently facing betrayal, manipulation, or the courage it takes to choose self-respect.